Lisa pulled her threadbare coat around her body as wind gusts cut like razors through Chicago's streets. Under the awning of an office building, she clutched the heart-shaped pendant against her chest, the only object still connecting her current life to a distant past. Hurried executives exited through the revolving door, their well-tailored suits protecting them from the cold and misery she represented. No one looked at her. It was as if she were invisible. She breathed deeply, the icy air burning her lungs. She couldn't let fear defeat her. She had to try. Her feet ached in worn boots as she stood up, her toes tingling. She spotted a middle-aged, elegant man about to enter a black limousine waiting by the curb. His presence exuded authority, and something told her he was different from the others. This man could be her last chance. "Please, sir." Lisa ran a few steps toward him, her hoarse voice barely audible over the wind. "I just need something to eat. Maybe a coat. Anything." The man stopped, frowning. His eyes narrowed as he examined her, as if trying to decide if she was worthy of his attention or just another figure in the city's shadows. His hand was already reaching for the car's handle, but then something caught his attention. The pendant on Lisa's neck shone under the yellowish streetlight. Bradley, owner of the building and one of the city's most influential men, froze. The small pendant was identical to the one his sister Claire wore every day until her untimely death. He blinked, feeling a knot in his chest. Could it be possible? Before he could say anything, a man emerged from the nearby alley. Lisa felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The stranger wore tattered clothes and had a cunning look, quickly assessing the scene. "What do we have here?" Clint, the local thug, laughed unpleasantly as he approached. "That thing on your neck looks valuable." Lisa instinctively backed away, her hand covering the pendant. "It's not what it seems, it's worthless." "Oh, I'll be the judge of that." Clint advanced, reaching out to grab her. Lisa stumbled backward, but not fast enough. "Hey, get away from her!" Bradley's voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but there was authority in it. Jones, his robust security guard, was already beside him. His expression hardened. Clint hesitated for a moment, but not enough to avoid confrontation. He stepped toward Lisa, who, desperate, picked up a piece of wood from the ground. The scene quickly turned to chaos. Jones advanced, but Clint was agile, pulling a knife from his belt. Lisa, even trembling with fear, managed to land a blow on Clint with the wood, making him stagger. "Drop it!" Jones shouted, disarming Clint with a firm strike. The metallic sound of the knife falling echoed on the empty sidewalk. Bradley stepped back, eyes fixed on Lisa's pendant, while the fight happened a few meters away. He seemed to be in another world. With a final kick to the shin, Lisa helped Jones immobilize Clint, but the man managed to break free. He darted into the alley he came from, knocking over boxes and garbage bags along the way. During his escape, something fell from Clint's pocket and slid near Lisa's feet. She quickly knelt down, picking up the small card that looked old. There was a symbol on it, a logo she didn't recognize, but that made Bradley narrow his eyes. "Are you okay?" Bradley finally asked, his voice tense as he approached. Lisa just nodded, still panting. The fight had left her arms shaking, but she wouldn't let go of the pendant. Bradley looked at the object on her neck once more, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "Where did you get that?" Lisa hesitated, her voice still wavering. "It belonged to someone I knew. Long ago." Bradley didn't respond immediately. His gaze changed from confused to something deeper, darker. He took the card from her hand, turning it in his fingers, eyes fixed on the symbol that seemed vaguely familiar. Lisa noticed the gravity in his expression. "Do you know this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Maybe," he said, without giving more details. His mind was racing, fighting against buried memories and a wave of emotions he didn't want to feel. He put the card in his pocket and turned his gaze back to Lisa, as if seeing something that wasn't there before. The snow continued to fall, but for a moment, the world seemed frozen. Lisa clutched the pendant once more, as if it could give her strength. Bradley watched in silence, something growing inside him. An uncomfortable doubt, a spark of something he couldn't ignore. The silence was broken by Jones, who was cleaning snow from his gloves. "We need to go, sir. It's late." Bradley nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't leave Lisa. He didn't know why, but he couldn't just leave her there. Not yet. Something told him this woman had more to offer than a sad story. And that pendant. He couldn't ignore what it meant. As he walked away, Lisa watched his silhouette disappear into the darkness of night, with the cold tightening around her. But her heart beat a little stronger, carrying something she hadn't felt in a long time. A spark of hope. Bradley stood for a moment beside the limousine, his gaze lost. The pendant continued to glimmer in his mind. He entered the car, but not before casting one last look at Lisa, and as the yellowish streetlight shone on the small metal heart on her neck, Bradley knew there was something about that woman he couldn't ignore. Bradley observes the pendant gleaming under the yellowish streetlight and feels the doubt grow. How did that object, missing for years, end up in the hands of this unknown woman? Bradley sat in the cafe's upholstered chair, feeling the cold wooden table under his fingers as Lisa hesitantly settled across from him. The atmosphere was cozy, a refuge from the relentless cold outside. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread hung in the air, but the tension between them was palpable. Lisa rubbed her hands, still trembling, trying to absorb the warmth from the cup of tea that a server had just placed in front of her. "Are you feeling better?" Bradley asked, his voice cutting through the silence. He seemed more uncomfortable than concerned, as if he wasn't used to moments like this. Lisa nodded slowly, her fingers gripping the cup tightly. "Yes, thank you." She looked at him, suspicious, but also hopeful. "Why are you helping me? You seemed about to ignore me out there." Bradley didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes wandered to the pendant still hanging from her neck. "That pendant, it's identical to the one my sister used to wear. Where did you get it?" Lisa's face closed off for a moment, and she looked away at the steam rising from her tea. "It was hers," she finally answered, her voice soft. "Claire gave it to me many years ago. We were friends, back when I still had a normal life." Bradley blinked, surprised. "You knew my sister?" Lisa nodded, a sad smile curving her lips. "I did, when we were children. She was my best friend, my only real friend." She paused, as if the words were difficult to form. "But life changes people. The last time I saw her was before the tragedy." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain. Bradley, who always avoided talking about Claire, felt a tightness in his chest. "What tragedy?" Lisa looked directly at him, her eyes reflecting something between hurt and courage. "The accident that took her life. After that, everything changed for me too. I lost more than a friend. I lost a part of who I was." Bradley leaned back in his chair, his face serious. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to dismiss the story, put everything down as a coincidence or even a lie, but there was something in Lisa's eyes, a sincerity he couldn't ignore. Before he could ask more, the cafe door opened with a subtle bell, and a man in a dark overcoat entered. Detective Marshall was known for his rigid posture and clinical gaze, and he walked directly to Bradley. "Mr. Bradley," he said without beating around the bush, "we need to talk about the incident outside, the attack on this young woman and your involvement. The police are concerned." Bradley snorted, annoyed by the interruption. "There's not much to say, Detective. A thug tried to rob her, and my security intervened. That's not enough for a scandal." Marshall tilted his head, his eyes moving from Bradley to Lisa. "Maybe not, but when a man of your position gets involved with someone from the street, the media tends to create stories." Lisa shrunk slightly under the detective's evaluating gaze. She pressed the pendant against her chest, as if it could protect her. "I don't want to cause trouble," she murmured. "She hasn't caused any trouble," Bradley retorted firmly. "She's a victim, Marshall. Treat her as such." Marshall raised his eyebrows but didn't insist. "Still, keep things discreet. The last thing you need is negative publicity." He cast one last look at Lisa before leaving the cafe. The silence that followed was heavy. Lisa went back to staring at her cup, her face pale and tired. "I didn't ask for you to get involved. If this is going to bring you trouble, I can leave." Bradley shook his head. "It's not that simple. If you really knew my sister, there are things I need to understand. That pendant." He hesitated, the words seeming difficult to articulate. "Why did Claire give you that?" Lisa sighed, the memory surfacing like a wave. "She said she wanted me to always remember that I was strong, even when the world knocked me down, that there would always be something to keep me standing." She smiled bitterly. "Sometimes I think I only stayed alive because of this." Bradley didn't know how to respond. The memory of Claire, always optimistic and full of energy, seemed distant now, almost unreal. But hearing Lisa talk about her brought everything back, painfully vivid. "I still don't understand," he finally said, his voice low. "How did you end up at this point, from Claire's friend to—" He gestured at her, trying to be delicate. Lisa raised her eyes, facing him. "To a homeless woman? Life happened, Mr. Bradley. I lost my job, my home, my dignity. One day you have everything. The next you have nothing. And the people who said they would be there for you disappear." The words hit Bradley like a punch. He looked away, uncomfortable, but unable to argue. Lisa didn't seem to be asking for pity, just telling her truth. "This can't be all," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "There must be a way out." "You think I haven't tried?" Lisa retorted, her voice gaining an edge of frustration. "Nobody listens, nobody cares. And now I'm here, telling my story to a man who will probably forget my name tomorrow." "I won't forget," he said, his voice firm, surprising them both. Lisa blinked, confused. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Bradley hesitated before answering. "Maybe because you knew someone who meant a lot to me, and maybe because I can't ignore the fact that this pendant is here, now, when I thought I'd never see it again." Lisa didn't know what to say. For a moment they just stared at each other, two completely different worlds colliding in a storm of unspoken emotions. Bradley took the mysterious card from his pocket, observing the ancient symbol stamped on it. Something about it deeply troubled him. He looked at Lisa, seeing in her an echo of the past that he still didn't fully understand. When he finally got up to pay the bill, he left some extra notes on the table. "Do you still have a place to go?" Lisa shook her head, unable to answer. "We'll figure this out," he said, almost more to himself than to her. As they left the cafe, the cold air enveloped them again, but this time, Lisa didn't feel the same despair. Bradley squeezed the card in his pocket while the snow fell softly around them. He didn't know where this story would lead him, but he knew he couldn't simply turn his back. Bradley watches Lisa as the snow falls outside and thinks, if she really knew Claire, then there's something much bigger hidden beneath the layer of ice of time. The snow fell slowly and silently as Bradley, Lisa, and Jones walked through the deserted streets of Chicago. The cold was relentless, biting, but something even colder seemed to lurk in each of their thoughts. Ahead, the Bradley family's abandoned building loomed like a specter from the past, its broken windows and faded sign a reminder of memories he preferred to keep buried. Lisa pulled her coat tighter around her body, trying to ignore the weakness threatening to overcome her. Her worn boots sank into the dirty snow as she glanced at Bradley. "Are you sure we'll find something here? It seems dead." Bradley kept his eyes fixed on the building ahead, jaw clenched. Whatever it is, we can't ignore it. This place might have answers. Jones walked silently beside them, his hand near the gun in its holster, alert to any sound beyond the wind. I don't like this. These places are magnets for trouble. They stopped in front of the building's entrance, where partially rotted double wooden doors swayed in the wind. Bradley stepped forward, pushing the door with his shoulder. The sound of creaking wood echoed through the dark lobby. The interior was as desolate as the exterior. The remains of old furniture were covered in layers of dust and mold. The walls were stained and cracked, with traces of something that was once grand. Bradley swept the flashlight across the room, the light cutting through the darkness and revealing a staircase leading to an upper floor. Lisa swallowed hard, her throat still sore from the cold. I used to imagine these old buildings held secrets. Now, I'm not so sure I want to discover what they are. Secrets are dangerous, Bradley replied, his voice low. But sometimes they need to be unearthed. They began exploring, with Jones leading the way. Their footsteps echoed, creating a heavy tension in the air. In a corner, Lisa found a fallen metal cabinet. She knelt down, pulling the door open with effort. Inside was a pile of yellowed papers, some so deteriorated they disintegrated at the touch. Look at this, she said, showing one of the papers to Bradley. He took it and examined it in the flashlight's beam. It was an old report with his family's company logo in the header. I recognize this, he said, squinting to read the faded lines. These are financial documents. This might be linked to Claire's foundation. Lisa stood up, holding one of the papers with incomplete dates and values. What if there's something here that explains everything? Something that connects the past to what's happening now? Bradley didn't have time to respond. A noise from the floor below made everyone freeze. It was the sound of footsteps, firm and determined. Jones raised his hand, indicating silence. Stay behind me, he whispered, drawing his weapon. The footsteps approached, and then two figures emerged from the gloom. They were large men, dressed sloppily, each holding an iron bar. Their eyes gleamed with the clear intention to protect something, or to hide. Who the hell are you? One of them growled, pointing the bar at Bradley. We don't want trouble, Bradley said calmly, trying to appear less threatening than he actually was. We're just here to get some old family information. We won't bother you. Old information? The other man laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound. This isn't your family's place anymore. Get out now or things will get ugly. Jones stepped forward, his arm steady. I suggest you think twice before doing something stupid. But the men weren't willing to negotiate. They advanced without warning, iron bars gleaming in the dim light. Jones reacted quickly, dodging a blow and hitting the first man with a powerful punch that sent him against a rusty beam. Lisa backed away, looking for something to defend herself. Her eyes landed on an unstable metal shelf. Get back! She shouted, pushing the shelf with all the strength she could muster. The structure toppled, spreading dust and wood pieces, blocking the second man long enough for Jones to take him down with a kick to the stomach. The fight was brief, but left everyone breathless. The attackers got up, staggering, and fled before they could be captured. The silence returned, heavy and charged with tension. Bradley looked at the ground where pieces of paper were scattered. He knelt down, picking up one of them. It was a fragment of a financial report, with dates, values, and names, but many were blurred or illegible. This is about Claire's foundation, he said, gripping the paper tightly. His voice trembled slightly, and it wasn't just from the cold. These numbers, something's wrong. How didn't we see this before? Lisa approached, still breathing heavily. If there was corruption, someone did a great job hiding it. Jones cast a worried look at the open door. We need to get out of here. They might come back with reinforcements. Agreeing, the group hurried to leave. When they got outside, the snow continued to fall, the building's roof accumulating heavy layers of ice and remorse. Bradley held the piece of paper tightly, as if it were both a clue and a burden. His eyes were fixed on the darkness ahead, but his mind was far away, on the secrets that place seemed to hold. He whispered almost to himself, "My father, did he know?" Back in the city, the silence in the car was as thick as the cold air outside. Lisa was huddled in the back seat, wrapped in a thin blanket that Bradley had provided before they left the abandoned building. The piece of paper, now stored in her purse, seemed to weigh more than it should. She looked through the foggy window, the city lights blurred like the thoughts swirling in her mind. Bradley was in the front seat, his face somber as he watched the streets unfold ahead. His jaw was locked, the expression of someone carrying the weight of questions he'd rather not ask. The car stopped in front of his company building, and he was the first to get out, muttering something to Jones. "Come," he said to Lisa without waiting for a response. She followed reluctantly, each step hindered by the fatigue that gripped her body. In Bradley's spacious office, the contrast was striking. The artificial heat and luxurious furniture seemed to belong to another world, one Lisa could barely conceive. Bradley threw the paper on the desk and sat heavily in the swivel chair, running his hands over his face. "This is madness," he muttered more to himself. "How did no one notice before? How didn't I notice?" Lisa sat in an opposite chair, her eyes watching the piece of paper as if it might explode at any moment. "Maybe no one wanted to notice," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier not to see." Jones remained standing near the door, arms crossed, alert to the slightest movement. If this leaked from the Claire Bradley Foundation, someone had a reason to hide it. Bradley looked at him, his gaze sharp. "And now everyone will think my family was behind this. My sister. She was the heart of this foundation. How can I prove she wasn't involved?" Lisa touched the pendant around her neck, an instinctive gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Bradley. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what people will think and focus on discovering the truth. Before he could respond, a knock on the door interrupted the moment. Jones opened it to reveal Detective Marshall with his impenetrable countenance. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, entering uninvited. "But we need to talk, Bradley. There have been questions about what happened at the abandoned building tonight." Bradley stood up, his expression tired and irritated. "I already told you it was an isolated incident. 2 men showed up and attacked. Nothing that needs further investigation." Marshall raised his eyebrows, visibly skeptical. "Perhaps. But the media is already sniffing around for a story. And I must say, for a man who likes to keep things discreet, you have a peculiar way of attracting attention." Lisa shrank in her chair, trying to disappear under the detective's gaze. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. Marshall gave her a brief look before turning back to Bradley. "I'll give you some time, but remember, people want answers. And if this has anything to do with Claire's foundation, well, you know how scandals work." After Marshall left, Bradley sighed deeply, sitting back down. "This is getting out of control." Lisa leaned forward, her eyes shining with determination. "You have to continue. You can't stop now." Bradley looked at her, and for the first time saw something beyond weakness in her expression. He saw a silent strength that echoed his sister's. "What if there's nothing to find? What if my family is guilty?" "Do you want answers or not?" Lisa asked defiantly. "Because if you don't, tell me now. I can't wait forever." The room fell silent, interrupted only by the sound of wind outside. Bradley ran his hand through his hair, fighting against the thoughts that tormented him. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "There was an accountant, Salazar. He worked for the foundation before disappearing. If anyone knows anything, it's him." Jones frowned. "Salazar? I thought he had vanished off the map." "Then let's find him," Bradley responded, determined. At that moment, Lisa began coughing violently, and Jones looked at her worriedly. "She needs rest, Bradley. She can't continue like this." "I'm fine," Lisa insisted, though her face was pale and her eyes sunken. "We can go tomorrow." Bradley looked at her for a moment before agreeing with a reluctant nod. "I'll pay for a hotel for you. It's not much, but it's better than going back to the street." Lisa hesitated before thanking him, the gratitude in her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Thank you." As they left the building, the cold night air enveloped them. They walked to a small nearby hotel, where Bradley checked Lisa in and handed her the key. She stared at him for a moment before entering, holding the key tightly. Across the street, a dark car was parked, with its headlights off. Lisa felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold as she noticed a shadow inside the car. She went up to her room, but couldn't forget the feeling of being watched. From her window, she looked outside. The shadow was still there, motionless, but clearly vigilant. Whatever they had found that night, they weren't alone in this search. In the hotel room window, Lisa sees someone's shadow watching from across the street and feels a chill. They're closer to the truth, but also more exposed. The next morning arrived with a gray sky, a wintry palette that reflected the tension in the air. Lisa descended the hotel stairs with firm steps, but her breathing revealed the fatigue her body still carried. Bradley and Jones waited outside, both with serious expressions. Snow accumulated in dirty piles on the sidewalks, while the city's movement continued at an indifferent pace. "Are you ready?" Bradley asked, his voice direct but with a touch of concern. Lisa nodded. "I am. We can't waste time." Jones opened the car door, a discreet vehicle that Bradley had arranged to avoid drawing attention. They settled in, and the engine purred low as the car glided through the city streets. The destination was a more remote neighborhood, known for its narrow streets and the shadow of businesses that avoided daylight. It was the kind of place where information could be bought or lost forever. Lisa looked through the window, observing the graffitied walls and worn facades passing by. "Do you think he's still around here?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "If the leads are correct, Salazar didn't have many options besides hiding in this kind of place," Bradley replied. "He knew too much. If someone found him before us, then we're in trouble." Jones remained quiet, but his eyes were alert, scanning every corner while driving. If he's still here, he'll be prepared. People like him always have an escape plan. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse, whose windows were covered with wooden boards, and the walls were marked by decades of neglect. The snow covering the parking lot ground reflected the diffused daylight, creating a treacherous gleam. Lisa took a deep breath before leaving the car, adjusting her coat around her body. "It's here," said Bradley, his tone full of determination. He checked the piece of paper they found in the family building, where Salazar's name was highlighted next to a partial address that had led them there. They entered through what appeared to be a side entrance, the door already half open. The air inside the warehouse was dense and damp, heavy with the smell of rust and abandonment. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, each noise amplified by the vastness of the place. "Are you sure this isn't a trap?" Lisa asked, tension evident in her voice. "We'll find out," Jones replied, walking ahead carefully. In the center of the warehouse, a dim light illuminated an improvised table. A thin, graying man was hunched over papers, muttering to himself. Salazar. He looked older than Bradley remembered, but his eyes carried the same glint of intelligence and paranoia. "Salazar!" Bradley called, his voice firm but without aggression. The man suddenly raised his head, eyes wide with fear. "What do you want? Who sent you?" "We're here for answers," Bradley replied, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "We know you worked for Claire's foundation. We found documents that indicate there's more than I knew about what happened." Salazar hesitated, his hand trembling while trying to arrange the papers in front of him. "I don't know anything. I can't help you." "Don't lie," Lisa intervened, stepping forward. "If you really knew Claire, if you knew who she was, then you must help us. It's the right thing to do." Before Salazar could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps erupted from the warehouse's main entrance. Clint appeared first, followed by 2 armed thugs. His triumphant expression made it clear they had planned this interruption. "Ah, look at this," Clint mocked, looking at Lisa. "You really like sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, don't you?" Lisa instinctively stepped back, but Bradley positioned himself beside her, his face hardened. "Let them go," he said to Clint, his voice low but loaded with threat. "This has nothing to do with you." "Oh, but it does," Clint replied, drawing a long, gleaming knife. "The boss doesn't want anyone digging into this past, and I'm paid to make sure you stay far away from it." The fight began before anyone could react. Jones charged against one of the thugs, disarming him with quick strikes. Clint tried to attack Lisa, but she grabbed a loose piece of wood from the floor and used it to block the blow. The impact made her stagger, but she didn't back down. Salazar, however, wasn't so lucky. In the chaos, he was hit by a shot that echoed through the warehouse. The accountant fell to the ground, groaning in pain, as a pool of blood began to form around him. "Salazar!" Bradley shouted, but didn't have time to reach him before Clint grabbed the documents on the table and ran out through a side exit. "I'll handle this!" Jones yelled, chasing Clint through the warehouse corridors. Bradley knelt beside Salazar, pressing the wound with trembling hands. "Stay with me," he said, trying to keep calm. "You need to tell me what you know." Salazar coughed, blood staining his lips. He tried to speak, but the words came out inaudible, mixed with the sound of sirens now approaching. "There's no time," Lisa whispered, eyes fixed on Salazar as tears threatened to fall. Bradley closed his eyes for a moment, frustration and despair mixing on his face. "Without these proofs, we're lost." The police arrived at the scene, but it was too late to stop Clint or his thugs. The warehouse was now full of voices, flashing lights and questions that no one had the courage to answer. Lisa observed the scene, holding the pendant in her hands as if it could give her strength. Everything they had seemed to have slipped through their fingers. As the sound of sirens increases, Lisa holds the pendant and thinks, "Without these proofs, Bradley will have no reason to help me. Everything could crumble." Lisa woke up in a dark and quiet room. The distant sound of wind against the windows echoed through the space. Her head was heavy, the fever still pulsing in her skin. She tried to sit up, but fatigue pulled her back against the worn pillows. The thin blanket wasn't enough to ward off the cold that seemed to come from within her. Bradley was sitting in a chair near the window, the weak streetlight illuminating his face. He held Lisa's pendant in his hands, slowly turning it as if he could find answers in the small object. His eyes were fixed on emptiness, but his mind seemed to be in turmoil. "You should rest," he said without looking at her, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I can't," Lisa replied, her voice weak. "Not while everything is falling apart. You need to do something. We need to." Bradley finally turned to face her. His eyes were tired, but there was a growing determination there. "I know, but now we're without evidence, without Salazar, without the documents, and I don't know how to continue." Lisa coughed, her hand clutching her chest. "Don't give up. Not for me, but for Claire. If there's anything you can do to clear her name, you need to try." Before he could answer, a discreet knock on the door interrupted the moment. Jones entered with silent steps, his face carrying the concern he rarely showed. "Carmen is here," he said, crossing his arms. "She says she has something important for you." Lisa got up with difficulty, ignoring the fever that made her vision waver. "Let her in." Carmen entered hesitantly, her worn coat and disheveled hair showing the struggle of her own life on the streets. She looked at Lisa and shook her head. "You look horrible, girl. Are you sure you should be up?" "I'm fine," Lisa insisted, though her voice was hardly convincing. "What do you have to tell us?" Carmen looked from Lisa to Bradley, her distrustful gaze softening slightly. "I heard things," she began, her voice low as if the walls could hear. "About Clint. He's working for someone big. Someone who doesn't want you to discover the truth." "Does the name Hargrove come up in this story?" asked Bradley, straightening up in his chair. Carmen nodded, biting her lip. "Yes, he's pulling the strings. I heard they have a place where they hide things. Documents, evidence. It's risky, but if you can get there, maybe you'll find what you need." Bradley crossed his arms, processing the words. "Where is this place?" "It's in an abandoned warehouse on the west side of the city. Not a place I'd recommend for a night stroll," said Carmen, her eyes serious. "But if you go, you need to be quick and discreet. They won't hesitate to protect what they have." Lisa took a deep breath, feeling determination replacing some of the weakness. "Then that's where we're going." "Not so fast," said Bradley, his tone firm. "You're sick. I won't let you risk your life." Lisa stepped forward, even though unsteady. "I don't have a choice. This is about me, too. Claire trusted me, and I won't let her down now." Bradley stared at her for a long moment, the tension evident on his face. Finally, he sighed and looked at Jones. "Get the car ready. Let's go." The trip to the warehouse was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The car's air was heavy with anticipation of what was to come. When they arrived, the place was exactly as Carmen had described, gloomy and desolate, with the distant sound of dogs barking and cans being kicked by the wind. Jones led the way, his gun at the ready. Bradley and Lisa followed closely, each step echoing on the cold concrete. Outside, they peered through the cracks of a rusty metal door. Inside, Clint was leaning over a makeshift table, counting money while Hargrove spoke on the phone with an irritated expression. "We have to be quick," Bradley whispered, turning to Jones. Lisa looked at him, determined. "I can distract them." "That's too dangerous," Bradley retorted immediately. "I can do this," she insisted, her voice stronger than he expected. "Trust me." Reluctantly, Bradley nodded, and Lisa moved silently to the other side of the warehouse. With a loose piece of metal, she banged against a wall, creating a boom that echoed through the space. Clint immediately raised his head, his eyes narrowing. "What was that?" "Go check," ordered Hargrove, irritated. While Clint moved away, Bradley and Jones sprang into action. Jones advanced to neutralize Hargrove, while Bradley ran to the table, collecting the scattered documents. Lisa, meanwhile, found herself face to face with Clint in a dark corner of the warehouse. He grabbed her arm, a cruel smile on his lips. "Thought you could hide from me?" She fought against him, using all the strength she had, despite the weakness that threatened to overwhelm her. With a quick movement, she kicked Clint's leg, managing to break free. Bradley, with the documents in hand, shouted, "Lisa, let's go!" Jones knocked Hargrove unconscious on the floor, and the group ran out of the warehouse, the sound of footsteps and furious voices echoing behind them. When they reached the car, everyone was breathless but alive. Bradley held the papers tightly, his eyes quickly scanning each page. "We have what we need. This can save Claire's name." Lisa smiled, tired but satisfied. They had succeeded. Bradley squeezes the pendant between his fingers and promises himself, "I won't let Lisa die, or Claire's memory sink in the mud of corruption." The morning dawned gray and silent, with a layer of ice covering the alleys and deserted streets of Chicago. The air was cutting, but Lisa, Bradley, and Jones walked with determination, their steps echoing on the concrete sidewalks as they headed to the hideout Carmen had indicated. The cold seemed less important than the weight of what they were about to face. Lisa was shaking, but she didn't know if it was from the wind or the growing tension in her chest. Bradley walked beside her, eyes fixed ahead, and Jones followed right behind, alert to any suspicious movement. They had prepared the best they could, but the fear of the unknown hung in the air. "Are you sure it's here?" Bradley asked Lisa, his voice a bit hoarse. She nodded, still breathless. Carmen was right about the warehouse. If Clint and Hargrove have something to hide, it's there. They reached the alley Carmen had described, where the wind whistled between the decaying buildings and pushed empty garbage bags against the walls. At the end of the alley, a large, gloomy warehouse rose up, with boards covering part of its windows and a faded sign swaying in the wind. Jones examined the area carefully before signaling them to approach. "Stay behind me. We don't know how many people might be in there." Lisa pulled her coat closer to her body, trying not to let her fear show. She knew her presence there was risky, but she couldn't back down. Not now. They approached the warehouse, and Bradley found a gap between the boards of a window. The dim light inside illuminated an improvised table where Clint was bent over, counting stacks of money. Beside him, Hargrove was on the phone, his face hardened by an expression of frustration. "They're here," Bradley whispered, his jaw tense. He looked at Jones. "What's the plan?" Jones thought for a moment before responding. "A distraction. If we can get Clint away, we can grab the papers on the table. You and Lisa go in. I'll handle Hargrove." Lisa shook her head. "What if something goes wrong? They've tried to stop us before. They won't hesitate now." "That's why we have to be quick," said Bradley with a firm tone. He looked at her, his gaze softer. "Stay close to me." Lisa took a deep breath and nodded, holding the pendant against her chest for a moment before preparing herself. They went around the warehouse, finding a side entrance that was partially open. The sound of muffled voices came from inside. "I'll handle the distraction," said Lisa with determination in her voice. "You get the papers." Before they could protest, she picked up a stone from the ground and threw it against a pile of metal cans near the entrance. The thunderous sound echoed through the warehouse, making Clint raise his head immediately. "What was that?" he growled, standing up. "Go check," said Hargrove impatiently. "But be quick." Clint grabbed his gun and went toward the sound, while Bradley and Jones moved silently inside. Lisa's heart was racing as she hid behind a stack of boxes, watching the scene unfold. Bradley reached the table and began collecting the papers, his eyes quickly running over the lines of text and stamps that confirmed their suspicions. "Here it is," he whispered to Jones. "This proves the Foundation's money diversion." Meanwhile, Hargrove noticed the movement and advanced toward them, an expression of fury on his face. Jones intercepted him, the two engaging in a fight that made the warehouse echo with sounds of impact and grunts. Lisa saw Clint approaching again and felt panic rising. She needed to act. Without thinking, she stood up and shouted, "Clint, is this what you do now? Steal and lie to protect people like him?" Clint stopped, surprised for a moment, before advancing toward her. Lisa backed away, her heart pounding, but kept her composure. She needed to buy time. "You don't understand any of this," Clint growled, the gun now pointed at her. "Stay out of this, girl." While he was distracted, Bradley grabbed the documents and signaled Lisa to run. She quickly ducked down and grabbed a piece of rusty metal, throwing it toward Clint. The object didn't hit him, but it was enough to break his concentration for a second. Jones, despite having already taken down Hargrove, ran to intervene. He attacked Clint with a firm strike, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. "You're finished," he growled. With the documents secure, Bradley pulled Lisa by the hand, and together they ran to the exit. The cold wind hit them as soon as they left the warehouse, but neither of them stopped until they reached the car. Inside, breathless and covered in sweat, Bradley held the papers tightly, his eyes scanning the pages. "We have everything we need," he said, a slight smile appearing on his tired face. "Now it's our turn." Lisa looked at him, her heart still racing, but a new flame of hope growing inside her. "And now?" Bradley stared at her, his face serious. Now they can't stop us anymore. Lisa bites her lip and before moving forward whispers, "If we fail, there won't be a second chance." The interior of the warehouse was shrouded in darkness, metal beams casting unsettling shadows on the worn walls. Lisa moved carefully, her heart racing as she watched Bradley and Jones plan their next steps. The papers they had obtained were safe in the car, but they knew Hargrove and Clint wouldn't back down so easily. "We have to make sure they don't destroy anything else," said Bradley, his voice low but resolute. "These documents are just one part. They might have more evidence hidden here." Jones nodded, eyes fixed on the back of the warehouse where lights flickered. "We need to be quick. They know we're here." Lisa pulled her coat tighter around her body, the cold penetrating to her bones. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice trembling, but not from fear. She was determined to help, despite the exhaustion that still consumed her. Bradley stared at her, hesitating for a moment. "Distract them again, but don't risk too much. We just need a few seconds to get what's left." Lisa nodded, taking a deep breath before moving away toward a dark corner of the warehouse. She found a rock and threw it against a metal panel, the sound echoing through the space and attracting Clint's attention, who was searching the area impatiently. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice reverberating like thunder. He dropped the stack of bills he was counting and advanced toward the noise. Meanwhile, Bradley silently approached the table where more documents were scattered. He began collecting them, his hands quick but careful. Hargrove, however, noticed the movement and attacked. "I won't let you take any of this," Hargrove shouted, grabbing a pipe and charging at Jones, who positioned himself between him and Bradley. The fight began with dull blows and sparks in the air as metal hit the floor. Jones was agile, blocking Hargrove's attack with his forearm and retaliating with a powerful punch that made him stumble back. Lisa, in turn, found herself face to face with Clint again. He grabbed her by the jacket, his cruel smile returning. "You've got guts, girl, but it's not enough." She screamed, trying to break free, and with a quick movement stomped hard on his foot. Clint grunted in pain, loosening his grip enough for her to back away. Lisa grabbed a broken broomstick nearby and used it to keep Clint at bay. "You don't know me," she said, her voice full of fierce determination she didn't even know she had. "And you won't stop me." As Clint advanced again, Bradley, papers in hand, looked desperately at Lisa, hesitating for a moment. He knew he couldn't leave her behind. "Lisa, run!" he shouted. She tried to back away, but Clint reached her, grabbing her arm again. Before she could react, Jones appeared, delivering a blow that made Clint release Lisa and fall to the ground, groaning in pain. "Now," Jones said, pulling Lisa while Bradley was already at the exit, the documents firmly secured in his hands. They ran out of the warehouse, the cold wind cutting their faces as they moved away. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and something heavy was thrown in their direction, missing by inches. In the dark alley, Carmen suddenly appeared, making her way between boxes and trash bags to help them. "This way," she called, gesturing hurriedly. The group followed through a series of narrow passages, the sound of their pursuers gradually fading in the distance. Finally, they reached a safe location where they could stop and catch their breath. Bradley raised the documents under the light of a nearby lamppost, the stamps and signatures now visible. "We did it," he said, his voice still breathless but with a note of triumph. "Now we have what we need to prove everything." Lisa, though exhausted, smiled for the first time in days. There was hope now, a real chance to bring justice. Bradley looked at her, and, despite the weariness in his eyes, there was a gleam of renewed determination. "Now they can't stop us anymore." Lisa smiles, even tired, and Bradley says breathlessly, "Now they can't stop us anymore." In Detective Marshall's office, the air was heavy with the weight of truth. Bradley placed the documents on the desk firmly, his hands still shaking slightly after the frantic run from the night before. The cold light from the desk lamp reflected on the papers, highlighting stamps, signatures, and irrefutable evidence of the corruption scheme that tarnished the name of the Claire Bradley Foundation. Marshall adjusted his glasses, examining each page carefully. His eyes narrowed as he absorbed the details, the gravity of the information reflecting in his expression. "This is substantial," he finally said, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and admiration. "If this is true, Hargrove is finished." "It is true," Bradley stated, his voice firm. "And we won't stop until he and everyone involved are held accountable." Lisa sat in a chair beside them, her shoulders still heavy with fatigue, but her eyes shone with something new. Hope. She clutched the pendant against her chest, as if that small object was the anchor keeping her steady in the midst of the storm. "Then it's time to act," said Marshall, pushing the papers aside and picking up the phone. "Let's get a warrant and end this." Hours later, the operation was underway. Police cars moved quickly through the streets, sirens cutting through the cold silence of early afternoon. They arrived at Hargrove's hideout swiftly, raiding the place with precision and force. Outside, Bradley, Lisa, and Jones watched as Clint and Hargrove were led away in handcuffs. Hargrove, always so confident and untouchable, now looked smaller, defeated. Clint kept his head down, avoiding everyone's gaze, while police carried boxes of documents from the warehouse to their cars. "Will this fix everything?" Lisa asked, her voice hesitant, still uncertain about what would come next. "Not everything," Bradley replied, watching the scene with somber eyes. "But it's a start. Claire's foundation will have its name cleared, and we'll make sure none of this happens again." Lisa looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his words. He was no longer the cold, calculating man she'd met that frozen night under the marquee. Something had changed in him, and she knew Claire would be proud of that. Later, at the hospital, Lisa lay in a clean bed, with a cozy blanket covering her. The sterile smell of the place made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. The TV in the corner of the room was broadcasting news about the arrests and the exposure of the corruption scheme. Those involved in the misappropriation of funds from the Claire Bradley Foundation were arrested today, the anchor said, her voice firm but enthusiastic. The investigation revealed an elaborate scheme that damaged the reputation of one of Chicago's most respected initiatives. With the help of recently discovered documents, the foundation's name is being restored, and justice is being served. Lisa smiled, closing her eyes for a moment. The weight she had carried for so long finally seemed to start dissipating. Bradley entered the room, a soft expression on his face. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," she replied, smiling. "Finally better." Bradley looked at the TV where an image of Claire appeared alongside a tribute. "She would be proud," he said, more to himself than to Lisa. "She would be proud of you," Lisa corrected, her voice gentle but firm. "You made this happen." He shook his head, his gaze distant. "I didn't do it alone. You were the reason for all of this, Lisa. Without you, I would never have seen beyond what was right in front of me." Lisa touched the pendant on her neck, feeling a wave of emotion. "Claire believed in me when no one else did. Now it seems she managed to make you believe too." A few days later, at a press conference, Bradley announced the creation of a new homeless support program, funded by the Claire Bradley Foundation. He spoke with a sincerity that surprised even his harshest critics, describing how the streets of Chicago had taught him lessons about compassion and responsibility. "My sister believed that everyone deserves a second chance," he said, his voice strong but emotional. "And that's what we're doing here. Not just clearing her name, but ensuring her legacy continues to change lives." Lisa watched the broadcast from her hospital bed, discreet tears rolling down her cheeks. Carmen was by her side, smiling while chewing a piece of chocolate she had brought to share. "You did it, girl," Carmen said, patting Lisa's shoulder lightly. "You in the suit really did something big." Lisa laughed, wiping away tears. "I still can't believe we made it this far." "And there's more to come," said Carmen. "This is just the beginning." At the end of that day, Bradley returned to the hospital to visit Lisa. He entered the room and stood for a moment, observing her in the soft afternoon light. She looked stronger, more alive. He felt a wave of gratitude and respect for this woman who had transformed his life. He approached the bed and sat beside her, smiling. "Ready for what comes next?" Lisa looked at him, a sparkle in her eyes. She touched the pendant one more time before answering. "And now, what will we do with this second chance?" Lisa stares at the pendant with a new sparkle in her eyes and asks, "And now, what will we do with this second chance?" Lisa adjusted her new coat while walking through the busy streets of Chicago. The air was still cold, but the feeling was different. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of possibility. Bradley's company building stood before her, imposing, but somehow less intimidating than it seemed before. She took a deep breath before pushing the glass door. In the sunlit lobby, Lisa was greeted by a warm smile from the doorman, Manny, who waved at her enthusiastically. "First day?" he asked. Lisa nodded, smiling shyly. "First day." A supervisor met her and guided her through the building, introducing the modern spaces and people crossing the corridors. When they reached a small but cozy room, he indicated a simple desk, strategically positioned next to a large window. "This will be your place," he said. "Welcome to the team." Lisa looked out the window where sunlight reflected off the melting snow. The view was almost symbolic, a new beginning, clean and full of promise. On the desk, there was a welcome card and a small vase with white flowers. She touched the petals delicately, feeling a wave of gratitude. As she settled in, Bradley appeared in the hallway with his usual elegant coat and confident posture. Seeing her, he approached and smiled, a gesture that now seemed completely natural. "How's it going?" he asked, leaning slightly to speak. "Good," Lisa replied with a sparkle in her eyes. "It still feels a bit surreal." "Get used to it," he said with slight humor in his voice. "You belong here." Lisa smiled, a quiet emotion warming her chest. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but being there was already an achievement she had never imagined. Later, in a meeting room, Bradley conducted a session with his team to discuss new social projects funded by the Claire Bradley Foundation. He spoke with passion, his vision clear and inspiring. Lisa watched from the back, impressed by the commitment he showed. "We're going to start with homeless assistance programs," he said, gesturing to a graph on the screen. "Not just offering food and shelter, but also education, training, and real opportunities for a fresh start." After the meeting, Lisa stayed behind a bit, watching the team leave. Bradley approached again, hands in his pockets. "So, what did you think?" he asked. "It was amazing," Lisa replied sincerely. "You're really making this happen." "Not alone," he said, his voice softer. "This is something we're doing together." Lisa felt warmth flood her heart. It was something she had never imagined hearing, that her contribution, small or large, really mattered. A few days later, Bradley and Lisa walked together to a quiet cemetery. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the ground damp, but the weather was peaceful. They stopped in front of a headstone with Claire's name delicately engraved. A small arrangement of fresh flowers rested there, and Bradley knelt to adjust the vase, a gesture that seemed full of reverence. Lisa stood in silence, touching the pendant that now seemed even more meaningful. "I feel like she's here," she said softly. Bradley nodded, without raising his eyes. "She was always the heart of all this. I'm just trying to continue what she started." They stayed there for a few minutes, the shared silence loaded with meaning. When they got up to leave, Bradley looked at Lisa, his expression sincere. "Thank you for reminding me of what really matters." Lisa smiled, her gaze shining. Thank you for believing in me. Back in the city, the impact of the changes was already visible. A new community center had been opened in the heart of Chicago, with volunteers distributing hot meals and offering assistance to those who needed it most. Lisa visited the center alongside Bradley, watching people gather, full of hope. She found Carmen there, serving soup with contagious energy. Hey, look who decided to show up, Carmen said with a broad smile. Lisa laughed, hugging her friend. This is amazing, Carmen. You're amazing. You too, Carmen replied. And look, we did this together. Across the room, Manny, the doorman, helped with boxes of donated clothes, while Jones made a discreet round, ensuring everything remained in order. The center was a reflection of collective effort, and Lisa felt a wave of pride for being part of it. That night, back at the company building, Lisa packed her things to leave. Before leaving, she stopped to look out the window. The city lights shone with a warmth she couldn't see before. It was as if the world had finally started to change, one small act of kindness at a time. Bradley appeared in the hallway, ready to leave too. He stopped beside her, observing the same view. Do you still have that pendant? He asked, his voice soft. Lisa touched the small heart hanging on her neck and nodded. Always. It reminds me of what's important. Bradley smiled, a genuine smile that spoke more than words. Good. Because sometimes a small heart can rebuild an entire life. Lisa laughed softly, holding the pendant with affection. And a simple act of kindness can warm an entire city. Together they walked out of the building, the winter sun shining on the horizon, promising better days. And so, under the winter sun, the past finds peace, the present gains purpose, and the future, hope.